Welcome back to the deep dive. This one is for the military history buffs out there, especially those fascinated by European history. We're going way back in time to ancient Greece, exploring those conflicts and battles that surprisingly still echo, even in our modern world. I mean, you probably think of like democracy and philosophy, but these city-states were constantly clashing and forging military strategies and innovations that would really, change the course of European history. Our sources for this deep dive are excerpts focusing on ancient Greece, with a special emphasis on Athens and Sparta, and of course, the development of the Athenian democracy. It is amazing how relevant the stories of these ancient city-states are even today. We're not just going to recount battles. We're going to analyze their impact on the evolution of warfare and how they shaped the political landscape of Europe. Yeah, exactly. When you picture ancient Greece, it's easy to imagine a unified empire. Yeah, but it was actually far from it. Instead, we have this incredibly dynamic period where hundreds of independent city-states were constantly vying for power and influence. Think of it like this. Imagine the landscape of ancient Greece with its mountainous terrain and scattering of islands. This geography naturally fostered a fragmented political landscape, making it incredibly difficult for any one ruler to unite the entire region. And here's where things get really fascinating to me. These city-states, while often at odds with each other, were built upon a shared foundation. One that's pretty unsettling, when you consider its implications. We talk about slavery, right? It's an uncomfortable truth, but we can't ignore the fact that slavery was deeply ingrained in the economic and social structures of ancient Greece. It's crucial to understand this aspect because it shaped their values, their political systems, and even the way they waged war, right? And that's something we'll keep in mind as we go deeper. For this deep dive, we're going to primarily focus on two major players, Athens and Sparta. Their stories essentially kickstart European history as we know it. Two iconic city-states whose rivalry and conflicts had a lasting impact on the course of Western civilization. Their contrasting approaches to governance, warfare, and society offer a fascinating study in how different ideologies can shape the course of history. So we're focusing on Athens especially, its journey towards democracy. It's a story that starts shrouded in legends, like the tale of Cecrops, the mythical founder of Athens who was part man and part serpent. These myths and legends weren't just fanciful stories, they often provided clues to a culture's values and beliefs. In the case of Cecrops, the myth points to the ancient origins of Athens and its connection to powerful deities, particularly Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. And of course, there's the legendary Theseus, the hero who slew the Minotaur, freeing Athens from Cretan dominance. These stories, while steeped in mythology, give us a glimpse into the Athenian psyche, their aspirations, and their values. And they set the stage for a pivotal moment in Athenian history, the transition from monarchy to a more democratic system, a turning point that would have a ripple effect throughout Europe. And that's where King Codrus comes in. He's a legendary figure who self-sacrificed to protect Athens from invaders, marked the end of monarchy, and set Athens on a unique path toward democracy. It's almost poetic, right? A king's death paves the way for a system where power is shared among the people. It's a fascinating contrast to what was happening in other parts of the world at that time. While Athens was moving away from monarchy, China, for example, was consolidating its power under the Zhou dynasty, a centralized monarchy that would last for centuries. This stark difference highlights how societies, even in ancient times, grappled with the fundamental questions of governance and power. Okay, so the monarchy's gone. Now Athens needs a new form of leadership. Enter the archons. Think of archons as governors, leaders appointed to rule Athens after the end of the monarchy. But this transition was far from smooth. The common people who had hoped for a more equitable system found themselves still under the thumb of the aristocracy. And these tensions, this struggle for power and equality, fueled a series of reforms and upheavals that would ultimately shape the very essence of Athenian society. That's where figures like Draco and Solon come in. Exactly. Draco, an archon whose name has become synonymous with harsh punishments, introduced a code of laws so severe that they were said to be written in blood. But in a way, his laws, while brutal, reflected the anxieties of a society grappling with rapid change and the challenges of maintaining order. Thankfully, Solon, another archon, came along and introduced some significant reforms. He addressed the issue of debt slavery, restructured Athenian society by creating wealth-based classes, and gave more people a voice in their government. Solon's reforms were a critical step toward greater equality and representation.
He laid the groundwork for a system where power was distributed more broadly, paving the way for the eventual emergence of democracy in Athens. But as we'll see, the path to democracy was anything but straightforward. Yeah, it's fascinating how even with these reforms, the path to democracy in Athens wasn't a straight line. We often think of historical progress as this inevitable march forward, but it's rarely that simple. In the case of Athens, we see a period of instability and even tyranny before democracy truly takes root. You talking about Pisistratus, right? He's often labeled the tyrant, but from what I've read, he actually implemented reforms that benefited the common people and even expanded Athenian influence. It's a bit of the paradox, isn't it? It is. Pisistratus, despite seizing power and ruling with an iron fist, understood the importance of appeasing the masses. He invested in infrastructure, promoted agriculture, and even fostered a cultural renaissance in Athens. His reign, though authoritarian, laid the groundwork for the economic and social stability that would make Athenian democracy possible. And then comes Cleisthenes, the reformer who really cemented the foundations of Athenian democracy. He introduced some truly groundbreaking ideas, didn't he? Cleisthenes was a visionary. He recognized that democracy to be successful required mechanisms to prevent the concentration of power and ensure that all citizens had a voice. That's why he expanded the council, introduced lotteries for selecting officials, and established ostracism, a fascinating system where citizens could vote to exile individuals deemed a threat to the democracy.
It's mind-boggling to think how these innovations developed thousands of years ago still influence our ideas about democracy today. The concept of checks and balances, the importance of citizen participation. These principles have their roots in ancient Athens.
It's a powerful reminder that the ideas of the past can have a profound impact on the present, and it highlights the fact that democracy, while a powerful force for good, requires constant vigilance and safeguards to protect it from those who would seek to undermine it.
Okay, so we've seen how Athenian democracy, so revolutionary for its time, actually came to be. But how did it function in practice? What was it like for an Athenian citizen to actually participate in this system?
Well, first, it's crucial to remember that Athenian democracy wasn't inclusive by modern standards. Only adult male citizens, a fraction of the total population, had full political rights. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded.
That's a point worth emphasizing. When we talk about Athenian democracy, we need to be mindful of its limitations. It was by no means a perfect system.
Precisely. But for those eligible, the heart of Athenian democracy lay in the assembly or ecclesia. This was a gathering of citizens where they debated and voted on laws, elected officials, and even made decisions about war and peace. Imagine thousands of citizens gathered in the open air, passionately discussing and shaping the future of their city.
It must be quite a spectacle. But with so many people involved, how did they keep things orderly?
There were systems in place. The assembly had a presiding officer, and speakers had to follow certain rules. But yes, it could get quite rowdy with citizens shouting, jeering, and even resorting to bribes or intimidation to try and sway the vote. It was a far cry from the carefully orchestrated political processes we see today.
It sounds like Athenian democracy was a truly participatory experience.
It was. And this direct engagement of citizens in decision-making is what made it so groundbreaking. They weren't just voting for representatives, they were actively shaping the policies and laws that governed their lives. It was a system that demanded a lot from its citizens, but also empowered them in a way that few other systems have.
So how did they choose who would actually run the government and carry out the assembly's decisions?
That's where the Council of 500 or Bull comes in. This body, composed of 50 citizens from each of the 10 Athenian tribes, served as a steering committee. They proposed laws, oversaw government administration, and essentially kept the machinery of government running smoothly.
And these council members, they weren't elected, were they?
No, they were chosen by lot, a system designed to prevent any one group or individual from gaining too much power. It was a remarkable commitment to equality and a way to ensure that even the most ordinary citizen could have a chance to participate in government. Imagine that your name being drawn randomly to serve on a council that governs a city.
That's incredible. Talk about putting your faith in the wisdom of the people.
And what's even more fascinating is their approach to justice. They had large juries, sometimes composed of hundreds of citizens, also chosen by lot to hear cases and deliver verdicts. It was a system where justice was truly in the hands of the people.
It's intriguing to think about a legal system without professional lawyers. How did ordinary citizens navigate this system? Were there any safeguards to ensure fairness?
It's true that the lack of professional legal representation could create challenges. Citizens often had to present their own cases and defend themselves, relying on rhetoric and persuasive arguments. And while there were safeguards in place to prevent abuses of power, the system was certainly not perfect.
So just like any political system, Athenian democracy had its strengths and weaknesses. But it stands as a remarkable experiment in self-governance, one that continues to inspire debate and discussion even today.
Absolutely, and it's important to remember that this Athenian democracy developed alongside a powerful military force, especially their navy.
Right, Athens' geography, with its long coastline and access to the Aegean Sea, naturally led them to develop a strong naval force. And these warships, known as triremes, were not just powerful, but also technologically advanced for their time.
These triremes, sleek and maneuverable vessels powered by rows of oarsmen, were essential to Athenian power and influence. Their ability to control the seas allowed them to project their power, protect their trade routes, and ultimately defend themselves against threats from powerful empires like Persia.
Now, this is where things get really exciting for our military history enthusiasts. The clash between Athens and the Persian Empire was a defining moment not just for Greece, but for the course of European history.
The Persian Wars were a series of conflicts that tested Athenian democracy and military might to their limits. It was a clash of civilizations, confrontation between the democratic ideals of Athens and the vast, centralized power of the Persian Empire.
But Athens' rise to power didn't go unnoticed. A new threat was emerging on the horizon: the mighty Persian Empire. He tells a bit more about how this clash of civilizations came about, what led to these epic confrontations.
Well, the Persian Empire under rulers like Darius and Xerxes was expanding rapidly. They were seeking to conquer new territories and extend their influence across the Mediterranean world. The Greek city-states, including Athens, found themselves directly in the path of this expanding empire.
So the Greeks, particularly the Athenians, were faced with a choice: submit to Persian rule or fight for their independence and their way of life.
Exactly, and the Athenians, fiercely independent and protective of their democratic ideals, weren't about to surrender without a fight. This clash of ideologies added another layer of complexity to these conflicts. It wasn't just about territory or resources, it was about fundamental values and the right to self-determination.
It's fascinating to think how these ancient battles were shaped not just by military strategy, but also by these fundamental differences in values and political systems. These wars weren't just about military victories, they were about the future of Greek civilization.
And the impact of these wars extended far beyond the battlefield. They shaped Athenian identity, their perception of themselves as defenders of freedom and democracy, and ultimately their legacy in Western civilization.
So we talked about the rise of Athenian democracy and their clash with the Persian Empire. But to fully grasp the impact of ancient Greek conflicts on the course of European history, we need to delve into one of history's most legendary rivalries: Athens versus Sparta.
Yeah, it's a rivalry that has captured the imagination for centuries, a clash of civilizations that shaped the destiny of ancient Greece and had ripple effects throughout Europe.
It sounds like a classic movie setup, right? You know, the intellectual creative protagonist against the strong, silent, battle-hardened antagonist. But as we know, this was anything but fictional. Their rivalry was very real, with consequences that echoed for centuries.
Exactly, and to truly understand it, we need to go beyond the stereotypes. Both Athens and Sparta were complex societies, each shaped by unique historical circumstances and driven by their own ambitions.
Let's start with Sparta. What made this city-state such a military powerhouse?
Well, Sparta's entire social structure was geared towards producing warriors. From the moment a Spartan boy was born, his life was dedicated to the state, to rigorous military training and unwavering discipline.
It's almost hard to imagine the kind of upbringing Spartan boys endured. I read that they were taken from their families at a young age and subjected to incredibly harsh training.
Yes, the agaga, as their training system was called, was designed to push boys to their physical and mental limits. They endured harsh conditions, physical challenges, and even ritualistic beatings, all to mold them into the ideal Spartan warrior.
It's incredible to think about how their society valued duty, honor, and self-sacrifice above all else. It was truly a culture built for war.
And this militaristic focus had a profound impact on their military prowess. Their hoplites, heavily armed infantrymen, were renowned for their discipline and effectiveness in close combat.
And their signature formation, the Spartan phalanx. I can just picture it. A wall of shields and spears advancing with unwavering determination.
The Spartan phalanx was a force to be reckoned with. It was a nearly impenetrable formation that allowed them to dominate the battlefield and instill fear in their enemies.
So while Athens was building its naval power, Sparta was perfecting the art of land warfare. And these contrasting military strengths would ultimately lead to one of the most pivotal conflicts in ancient Greek history, the Peloponnesian War.
The Peloponnesian War, a decades-long struggle between Athens and Sparta, was a clash of titans that reshaped the balance of power in the Greek world. It was a war that tested the limits of both Athenian democracy and Spartan militarism. It sounds like a true turning point in Greek history, a conflict that would determine the fate of these two great powers and shape the future of the region. Exactly. The Peloponnesian War was a complex and brutal conflict with shifting alliances, devastating sieges, and even a deadly plague that ravaged Athens. A plague? That's a fascinating and tragic twist. It's almost as if history itself intervened in this epic struggle. The plague which struck Athens in that weakened the city, both physically and psychologically, and it was a turning point that allowed Sparta to press its advantage. So with Athens weakened, Sparta seized the opportunity to shift the balance of power in their favor. Precisely. They continued to raid Attica, the regions surrounding Athens, and supported Athenian rebels in other parts of Greece. Their strategy was to wear down Athens both militarily and economically, and Athens, facing these challenges, made a fateful decision to invade Sicily. What was the thinking behind that move? The Sicilian expedition, as it's known, was a risky gamble. Athenian leaders hoped to conquer Sicily, a resource-rich island, and gain a strategic advantage over Sparta. It seemed like a bold move, but one fraught with danger. And as history would have it, turned out to be a disastrous decision. The expedition ended in a crushing defeat for Athens, with their fleet destroyed and their army captured. So this was a major turning point in the war. Athenian power was severely diminished, and Sparta now had the upper hand. Yes, and with the help of their Persian allies, Sparta continued to press their advantage. They saw an opportunity to finally break Athenian dominance once and for all. This is where the story takes a truly dramatic turn right. Sparta eventually laid siege to Athens itself. It was a pivotal moment in the war. The birthplace of democracy, the center of art and philosophy, was now under siege by the militaristic Spartans. It's almost a tragic irony, isn't it? Rather, the city that had given so much to Western civilization was now facing its own demise. In 404 BCE, facing starvation and defeat, Athens surrendered. It marked the end of the Peloponnesian War and the collapse of Athenian dominance, a momentous event that reshaped the political landscape of ancient Greece. What were the lasting consequences of this Spartan victory? Well, the immediate impact was a shift in power. Sparta imposed an oligarchy on Athens, dismantling their democratic system. But the long-term consequences were even more profound. How so? The Peloponnesian War had weakened all the Greek city-states, leaving them vulnerable to external threats. It also sowed the seeds of division and mistrust, paving the way for the rise of Macedon, a kingdom to the north, but would eventually conquer all of Greece. So in a sense, the rivalry between Athens and Sparta, while epic in scale, ultimately contributed to the decline of Greek power and independence. It's a reminder that even the most brilliant and innovative civilizations are not immune to internal strife, and that pursuit of power can have unintended and often tragic consequences. That's a powerful lesson, one that resonates throughout history. But even in defeat, Athens left an indelible mark on the world, didn't it? Absolutely. Athenian ideas about democracy, art, philosophy, and governance continue to influence Western thought long after their military defeat. Their legacy lived on, inspiring future generations and shaping the course of history. So as we wrap up this deep dive into ancient Greece, what key takeaways would you leave our listeners with? I think the most important lesson is that the conflicts and battles of the past are not just events in a history book. They shape the world we live in today, influencing our political systems, our military strategies, and even our values and beliefs. It's a reminder that understanding history is not just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding the forces that shape human civilization, the struggles, the innovations, and the enduring legacies that continue to influence our world. And for our listeners who are fascinated by military history, ancient Greece offers a wealth of insights into the evolution of warfare, the strategies and tactics, the technologies, and the human cost of conflict. It's a fascinating and complex period of history, one that continues to captivate and intrigue us even today. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore the epic clashes and enduring legacies of ancient Greece. Until next time, keep exploring and keep questioning.